I was born 87 years ago. For 65 years, I've ruled as Tamriel's emperor. But for all these years, I've never been the ruler of my own dreams.
Storytelling is the one part of a game that never ages. While graphics become dated, trends in game design come and go, and NPC AI starts to feel jankier and jankier the older a game gets, writing is the steadfast foundation that remains largely immune to the rapid changes of technology. What made a story good 20 years ago is what makes one good today. The fact that the Oblivion remaster exists is evidence of this. The assumption behind this move by Bethesda was essentially that if they could recreate the visuals with a modern graphics engine, update the most egregious of game design flaws like the old leveling system, and add some flair to the combat, the world and stories of Oblivion would carry the rest of the game into the modern era. But were they right? If not, no amount of graphical modernization will ever be able to cover up a disappointing story. This is not going to be a video where I simply summarize the plot of each quest and give it some kind of rating while pointing out a flaw here and there in a condescending tone. This will be a much deeper dive into what makes the good parts resonate and what causes the disappointing moments to miss the mark. We'll be talking about character arcs, themes, story structure, imagery, archetypes, and much more. I do need to summarize large parts of the plot in order to do these things, but the majority of this video will be spent analyzing and perhaps even overanalyzing the main quest. So kick back and relax as we wade into the storytelling of The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. The introductory cutscene starts with a close-up of Uriel Septim as he tells us of his ominous dreams.
I've never been the ruler of my own dreams.
I love this line because it hooks players immediately. In a world where most people have more games in their backlog than they can ever hope to play in a lifetime, we have almost nothing to lose by quitting and deleting the game forever. Game writers have to grab our attention early and hold it tight by using tension, by forcing us to constantly ask, what's going to happen next? Oblivion does this well. This first line, coupled with the unique visuals, capture our attention by causing us to ask, what are Uriel's dreams? Who rules them? After we've seen the enemy we will face in the game, Patrick Stewart utters the last few words of his very short and very effective introduction.
These are the closing days of the Third Era and the final hours of my life.
This is the true hook. How will this end, we wonder? Is the Emperor going to die? How will he die? Why? Can we stop it? We are compelled to complete the first dungeon at the very least. This is a good marker of the quality of writing in this brief cutscene, but that's nothing compared to how deep things get in the actual tutorial. After you make your character, you overhear the Emperor as he flees assassins who have already slain his sons.
They're dead, aren't they?
We don't know that, sire.
As your character meets Uriel face to face and you begin to follow him, you may notice the poetic nature of his dialogue.
No trophies of my triumphs precede me, but I have lived well, and my ghost shall rest easy.
5 times, Uriel Septim uses phrases first penned by Shakespeare. Specifically, they're all lifted from his play Julius Caesar. They're also all spoken by the same character, Julius Caesar, which we'll soon see is no coincidence. In this play, Caesar, the Emperor of Rome, is given a prophetic warning about his death and then assassinated by conspirators. But what I find really intriguing about this section of the game is the fact that they constantly contrast the two emperors. Here is the first quote we encounter.
But what path can be avoided whose end is fixed by the almighty gods?
It's slightly different from the actual quote. What can be avoided whose end is purposed by the mighty gods? This is spoken by Julius Caesar the very day he is assassinated. His wife, who is concerned about the ill omens of her prophetic dream, urges him to stay home, but Caesar won't listen. Both he and Uriel have been warned by a prophetic dream, and both are in the shadow of a looming assassination. Yet these two quotes are used to nearly opposite effects. Caesar says the words almost flippantly, to dismiss his wife's concern and proceed to the Senate heedless of the warning. He's a proud man, stating, "Things that threatened me ne'er looked but upon my back. When they shall see the face of Caesar, they are vanished." In other words, I'm untouchable. Yet Uriel Septim displays none of this arrogance. He knows full well that his death is upon him, accepts it, and does what he can to preserve his kingdom as he proceeds steadily towards his demise. The second quote appears directly before you, the player, pick your birth sign.
The skies are marked with numberless sparks, each a fire, and every one a sign.
Caesar's original words are, "The skies are painted with unnumbered sparks. They are all fire, and every one doth shine." Then Caesar continues right after, "But there's but one in all doth hold its place." He's talking about himself here, basically claiming that he is an unmovable force, set apart from all men. Unassailable, he says later. The irony is that this is mere seconds before he is assailed and, in fact, killed. It once more highlights his pride, his belief that he is destined as Rome's North Star to lead the people into prosperity. Yet Uriel omits the second part of the quote, and instead focuses on the fact that all men have a destiny to fulfill, not just him. We begin to understand Uriel's belief in destiny's undeniable nature, a theme that permeates Oblivion's main quest. Right after you pick your birth sign, he says,
Signs I read show the end of my path. My death, a necessary end, will come when it will come.
This is another allusion to the same conversation with Caesar's wife that I mentioned before, where she's warning him. Caesar says to his wife, "Of all the wonders that I have yet heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come." It's another way to dismiss his wife's concerns, trusting to fate that his death will come when it will, that there's nothing that he can do to avoid it. But the implication is that he believes it is far off, that his destiny is too great to be cut short. And once more, Uriel turns this phrase to mean the opposite. These are the words of a man who cannot escape fate, but grimly faces it. The final quote is by far my favorite and the most ingenious.
I go to my grave. A tongue shriller than all the music calls me.
This shrill voice which calls to him is that of fate, which he can't avoid and won't avoid. It's a line that perfectly summarizes how the Emperor of Tamriel views himself and his role in the universe. He cannot block out fate's beckoning. He, at the top of all earthly authority, must still bow to the will of fate. The original line from Shakespeare is from Act 1, Scene 2 of the play. Caesar has defeated his rival in a civil war, and people have taken to the streets to celebrate. Over the sound of all this celebrating, Caesar hears a voice cry out to him, "Caesar!" He replies, "Who is it in this press that calls on me?" I hear a tongue, shriller than all the music, cry, "Caesar, speak." Caesar is turned to hear. Here there is literal music, trumpets. Caesar hears the words despite this cacophony of celebration. It is the soothsayer who calls to him from the crowd. "Beware the Ides of March," he says, prophesying the day on which Caesar will die. The music Uriel hears, however, is figurative. When I first heard the quote, even without knowing the source, I took the word music to mean all other options, almost like fate is calling to him over the music of all the choices he cannot take. It is a perfect parallel. Both rulers hear the screeching cry of destiny, drowning out all that is around them. Both are given a prophecy to mark the end of their lives. Both can do nothing to avoid it. But where Julius Caesar proudly struts forward into his final moments, confident he's above death itself, Uriel Septim hears the voice and listens. He chooses to embrace it, doing what he can to secure the future of his kingdom in the meantime by preparing you, the player, to take the amulet and thwart the enemy. Because he embraces his end humbly, unlike Caesar, his empire is preserved. Caesar's empire, meanwhile, is plunged into another bloody war. These lines of dialogue are not just surface-level references to an emperor before his assassination. Rather, they create a carefully constructed allusion to another work of art that serves to elevate the lofty character of Uriel Septim and his noble intentions. It's an urban legend that Patrick Stewart received over 90 pages of material to prepare for his role as Uriel Septim. While I wasn't able to confirm that it was 90 pages, the documentary does mention the packet.
Ken had written a bunch of notes for Patrick Stewart on the character, very, very long, referencing things Stewart had done before. I thought was embarrassingly long, actually.
It's obvious that a lot of care went into writing this introduction. Many people enjoy the tutorial and its grand nature, but it's often chalked up to Patrick Stewart's performance. Don't get me wrong, he did a fantastic job and made the lines work.
Generals and kings have knelt at my command.
That's such a cheesy line that sounds good when he says it.
But I think we've undervalued how good the character is, how much work went into his dialogue, and how perfectly it sets up the rest of the story. I have no doubt that Patrick Stewart, a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company, picked up on the brilliance of this introduction. And if somehow the allusions passed him by, surely the many pages of notes would have spelled it out for him. It's masterfully crafted and shows us with brilliant colors that Uriel Septim was a firm believer in the stars, the gods, and fate. The message from the Emperor is that honor is found in embracing one's destiny, even if it strikes at your heart and forces the last sharp breath from your lungs. And he won't be the last Septim to learn this. Uriel is slain after giving us the Amulet of Kings. Boris asks us about our class and then sends us out of the sewers where we are greeted by the beautiful open world of Cyrodiil. The main quest continues at Waynon Priory. Here we meet Jauffre, the character with the second most lines of dialogue. We will soon get into the finer details of the story's structure and its main protagonist, but first, I feel that Jauffre must be brought to justice for his crime of being an utter waste of potential. He is as hollow as a drum and as one-dimensional as a Bruma guard. When we meet him, he fills in the missing pieces that Uriel couldn't give us, but in the most dry, press A to skip kind of way imaginable.
His successor then lights them anew upon ascending to the throne. With Emperor Uriel dead and no successor crowned, the Temple of the One will be dark for the first time in centuries.
There is one flash of color.
One night Uriel called me into his private chambers. A baby boy lay sleeping in a basket. Uriel told me to deliver him somewhere safe. He never told me anything else about the baby, but I knew it was his son. From time to time he would ask about the child's progress.
This is the moment when he becomes vaguely interesting, but it's fleeting and it tells us more about Uriel than Jauffre. Uriel dispatched the leader of his own bodyguard to bear the boy to safety and then checked in on him from time to time, showing his concern for him. But we don't know how Jauffre felt about it. Does he carry some responsibility? Has he grown fond of the man Martin has become? Does he regret not being able to be more present in the boy's life because of his duties? Characters become interesting when we can empathize with their desires. Jauffre has no tangible desires. He tells us a bunch of times to keep Martin safe, but it seems to be more in a otherwise the world ends kind of way. This moment where he describes how he was entrusted with baby Martin is an opportunity to give us a Hagrid kind of character, one who weeps openly upon losing the boy he delivered as a baby. Instead, we get a stiff vessel of exposition.
The Prince of Destruction he referred to is none other than Mehrunes Dagon, one of the lords of the jaws of Oblivion, certainly suggests that he perceived some threat. But all the scholars agree that the mortal world is protected from the Daedra of Oblivion by magical Only the emperors truly understand the meaning behind the rituals of coronation.
It really wouldn't have taken all that much for us to care about him. Imagine if we added a few short lines here and there. One night, Uriel called me into his private chambers. A baby boy lay sleeping in a basket. Uriel told me to deliver him somewhere safe. I still remember the baby's feeble cries coming from the back of the carriage as we traveled through the night. From time to time, Uriel would ask about the child's progress. I would make my yearly pilgrimage to the orphanage and check on him. I never knew a boy could grow so quickly, nor that I could care so much about someone who didn't even know my name. Uriel never told me anything else about the boy, but I knew it was his son. Even as a child, he had that same noble air about him, that same kind heart. 3 small lines of dialogue, and suddenly we care about Jauffre because he cares about Martin. And as a bonus, we get to know Martin a little bit better. Then, to remind us of this one thing that he cares about, Jauffre could occasionally express more concern about Martin. This could introduce some inner conflict where Jauffre knows Martin has a dangerous road ahead and he wants to protect him from it. For example, we could add this line before the Battle of Bruma where Martin first risks his life for the Empire. I fear for him. Every instinct tells me I must shield him from the coming danger. But he's not that little baby in the basket anymore. Simple, short, effective. Jauffre does express some concern before the battle at Bruma, but what he talks about is risk, implying risk to the city, not necessarily risk to Martin.
There must be another way. The risk is too great. The Countess will never agree to it.
The frustrating part is that they were so close. They already had the part where Jauffre was the one to deliver him. The bond is already there, but they don't explore it at all. It's a shame that this character isn't really given much, considering Jauffre has a lot of dialogue, but it all comes across as so stiff and easy to skip. This isn't the voice actor's fault, to be clear. It's the result of a character with little to no substance. One other thing before we move on to the next section. We'll start to see that Martin is meant to be a kind of Christ archetype, drawing on common imagery to help us understand the character. This begins here, before we even meet him. Notice that we're given almost no details about the circumstances of his birth, except that he is transported to safety in a basket. This is similar to Moses from the book of Exodus in the Bible, who is sent away to safety in a similar manner. Moses also eventually rises from obscurity to lead his people in a divinely appointed position of authority, just like Martin. Regardless of your religious views, we all understand the Christ archetype because of its prevalence in our society and in modern media. Oblivion is able to draw from this collective subconscious knowledge here and use it to its advantage by borrowing from the emotional weight associated with the archetype. Because we haven't met Martin yet, this is the only thing we know about him beyond who his father is, so it forms the basis of his character. We'll see this archetype built up throughout Martin's journey. For now, let's continue with the story. After being warned of the dangers, the player is sent to retrieve Martin from Kvatch, only to find it under siege. Whether you close the gate first or go immediately into the chapel, you will soon encounter Martin Septim. The boldest choice in Oblivion's main story is the decision to make Martin Septim the main character instead of the player. How do I know Martin's the main character? Well, Martin is the one who grows and experiences a character arc, not us. He is the one around whom all events and lore are centered. He is the one whose story matches the hero's journey. Seeing the rest of the main quest line through the lens of this decision will help us to evaluate the quality of the story as a whole, allowing us to understand the immense depth and quality of writing. But just as importantly, it will show us exactly why parts of the narrative fall woefully flat. But first, I think it's worth asking why the developers would choose to make someone other than the player the main character. What do they stand to gain? To understand this, let's take a look at two very different games, The Witcher 3 and Skyrim. These games take near opposite approaches to storytelling. In The Witcher, you play as Geralt of Rivia, a Witcher who is in search of his adoptive daughter Ciri. This story is powerful and focused on his arc of becoming a protector whose actions ultimately change the fate of the very literally named game world, the Continent. Because players are locked to this character, the developers can really dive into his psyche by putting him in scenarios tailored to Geralt, and by giving the player the power to choose the kind of Geralt they want to become. But you will always still be Geralt. You will never not be a Witcher. You will never have a different family. You will never have a stronger motivation than finding Ciri. You will never be able to just exist in the world and make your own story. This is a known bargain of disallowing player creation. But games like The Witcher and Red Dead Redemption are happy to make it because they know it results in deeper, character-driven narratives that stick with players for years and years. Skyrim, on the other hand, gives you the canvas and lets you paint whatever story you please. You are not Geralt. You are not Arthur Morgan. You are not Henry. You can be whoever you want. This absolute freedom is a big part of what motivates players like myself to revisit year after year. There are endless possibilities of who we can be and what we will do. Nothing is locked behind levels. Never are you forced into a relationship. Rarely are you told you have to do something, and not once do you actually have to do it. It is a fantasy sandbox, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But there is a narrative trade-off. Modern storytelling is predicated on character arcs, but since Skyrim is so focused on freedom, it will never force growth upon the player. This lack of a strong main protagonist is obvious in the larger plots of Skyrim. The fact that so few people even bother with the main quest is a good indicator of its quality. Those of us who do bother with it usually do so for completionist's sake, and the only character we ever really care about is Parthenax. The Dragonborn's story is our story, sure, but when it comes to the growth that happens along the way while saving the world, the writing leaves much to be desired. So there are two paths. One, well-crafted narratives with powerful character arcs that achieve this by partially limiting player agency, or two, ultimate freedom with bland or completely blank main characters. This is true of almost all games. You can have a compelling main character, or you can have limitless freedom, but not both. Oblivion is a notable exception. The game offers as much freedom as Skyrim to be who you want, yet the main quest also has one of the most heroic character arcs of all time. It's unusual because you get both a strong, likable lead who grows, while never once having your freedom as a player infringed upon. With this choice, the developers gained narrative leverage without losing the medieval sandbox we have come to love and expect from an Elder Scrolls game. So, to examine Martin's character growth and how the bulk of the main quest is structured, we'll be relying on the hero's journey. Quick disclaimer, between writing my script and recording the audio, I watched the Duke of Wales' narrative critique of Oblivion for the first time. I was initially concerned to discover that he also chose to analyze the game through the 12 beats of the hero's journey. I feared I had accidentally written a very similar video, but I quickly realized that, while structured similarly, the contents of our videos are vastly different. His analysis assumes the player is the hero, not Martin, and that changes everything. We both have very different approaches and cover different sections of the game with different examples and insights. So even if you have seen his video, don't worry, there will be very little overlap. If you haven't seen his video, you may be wondering why anyone would use this template to examine a story. Well, the hero's journey is a pattern that Joseph Campbell outlined in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. He observed this pattern all across literature throughout history. It is essentially a structure, not the only one, that resonates with humans and can be used reliably to understand most stories. When the developers of Oblivion stick to their commitment of making Martin the main character and follow the structure laid out by a story driven by his growth, Oblivion's main story is engaging and emotional.
We make our stand here, today, for the whole of Cyrodiil.
But when they deviate from the hero's journey and try to put Martin on the back shelf, the story crumbles and the gameplay suffers. We'll get to that soon enough. For now, it's time to meet Martin. The first step in the hero's journey is called the ordinary world, where we meet the main character prior to their call to adventure. We find Martin at the chapel in Kvatch. He's a priest of Kvatch, which essentially means he's a mediator between the people and their god. This duty of intercession between the mortal and the divine is also performed by the biblical figure of Moses, one of the earliest priests, and later Jesus, whom Christians call the high priest. In this way, Martin continues the Christ archetype.
He saved as many as he could that terrible night.
At this point, Martin doesn't know who his father is or that he has a destiny that entails anything beyond a humble life of priesthood. But even this destiny is at risk. We see the cracks in Martin's beliefs about the gods he serves.
Yes, I'm a priest. Do you need a priest? I don't think I'll be much help to you. I'm having trouble understanding the gods right now.
This sets up the basis of Martin's desires, and as I mentioned earlier when talking about Jauffre, desires are how we empathize with a character. It's human nature to see ourselves in others when we understand what they want. I love this quote from Christopher Vogler, who has his own version of the hero's journey, which is actually the one we're using. We're just programmed to observe anybody, even a stick figure drawing, and plug ourselves into the desires of that stick figure. If it's reaching its little stick hands out to pick up a baby, or just to get food, we automatically plug into that.
What plan? What are you talking about? I prayed to Kvatch all through that terrible night, but no help came. Only more Daedra. What can you possibly know that would help me make sense of this?
His need is fairly obvious. He wants to make sense of the world. He wants to understand the gods, their plan, and his involvement in such a plan. As a priest who serves the gods and is supposed to show others how to live in their favor, you can understand why this might be a little important. As you continue to talk to Martin, and if you try to leave with him before you destroy the Oblivion Gate, he says,
No. I'm sorry, but even if what you say is true, I won't abandon these people to their fate.
We already discussed in depth the prologue's obsession with fate. And here we see that Martin seems just as concerned. In just this short section, he mentions destiny, the gods' plans, and fate, the last of which I find the most interesting. He uses fate as a synonym for death here, and I don't think it's a coincidence. It shows his anger and frustration at Kvatch. He clearly believes the gods exist. Atheism isn't really a thing in Tamriel, but he bitterly resents them at the moment, and implies that fate and death are the same thing. There's this tension in Oblivion between the blessing and curse of destiny, this feeling of relief and peace in knowing that things are beyond your control, but also utter helplessness and confinement in feeling that you may not be able to do anything to alter the future. While some, like Julius Caesar, believe that fate will sustain them and that they therefore have nothing to fear, Martin has seen the horrors of the Daedra and knows that if fate is written in stone, he'd rather not participate.
If all this is part of a divine plan, I'm not sure I want to have anything to do with it.
The call to action, which is the next step, is intended to make the motives of the main character even more obvious, because someone will ultimately offer the hero an opportunity to grasp what they want. But that offer is almost always accompanied by a refusal. The hero finds an initial reason not to answer the call. This happens so that we can see the incredible danger present in the adventure, and to emphasize the stakes involved in accepting the call. It also humanizes the character, showing their fear and hesitation, whatever the reason may be. We, as the player, are the ones that give Martin the call to adventure. We tell him that he's the Emperor's son, and that the siege of Kvatch is a result of Mehrunes Dagon attempting to capture or kill him. I love his response.
Emperor Uriel Septim? You think the Emperor is my father? No, you must have the wrong man. I am a priest of Kvatch. My father was a farmer.
This is his way of retreating, even though he just said that a priest is of no use at this moment. We see not only his care for the people he rescued,
I'll go with you when we can all leave here together.
But also his hesitation to answer the call.
But I'm needed here. I can't leave.
There are two ways for Martin to eventually accept the call, depending on player choice. One way works quite nicely, and the other is much weaker from a storytelling standpoint. If you try to skip the first Oblivion Gate or head straight to the temple before joining Sylvia and Matthias to break the siege of Kvatch as I did during my first playthrough, Martin will refuse to come with you until the path is cleared of the gate and the hordes of Daedra outside of the chapel are dispatched. And by hordes I mean like 5 scamps and a Dremora. His refusal in this scenario is effective because it seems reasonable. Why would he come with us? It shows the true danger of his perilous mission. I'm not going with you, there are Daedra outside, and it makes his character believable. He does say he believes us, but saying that he won't come until we rescue everyone in the temple makes it seem almost as if he's using our desire for him to follow as leverage to encourage us to fend off the Daedra and free the people he brought to safety. The other scenario is less ideal. On my second playthrough on the remastered edition, I broke the siege immediately, then went to talk to Martin. He still refuses initially, but after you tell him everything, he just says,
You destroyed the Oblivion Gate, they say. You gave them hope. You helped them drive the Daedra back. Yes, I'll come with you to Wayne Priory and hear what Jauffre has to say. Lead on.
This feels much weaker. There's no real refusal, and when that beat is missing, the story feels less than whole. On the other hand, I like that there are options in the order in which you complete this section of the story, but I'm not sure it's worth it if one of the most common routes results in a disappointing moment that's supposed to feel significant. In either case, it's up to the player to break the siege of Kvatch so that Martin's reason for denying the call to adventure is torn away, forcing him into the next step of the cycle. One last note before we leave this beat. If you talk to some of the common people in the temple before breaking the siege, one of them will say,
I'll be safe here, won't I? They can't come on holy ground, can they?
This is the only explanation we're given as to why the chapel is spared, and I think it also hints at why Martin hasn't fully abandoned his duties in service of Kvatch. He seems at the brink, certainly, but not quite over the edge. I suspect that some part of him must feel grateful given that Kvatch's permeating power is the only thing that kept him and his fellow refugees alive. This little seed is enough to keep him from fully abandoning his post, and we'll soon see where that leads. Alright, we're ready for the next step in the journey. Martin leaves the chapel where he is served, where he once found purpose, and where he has begun to doubt that purpose. He takes the first step in becoming the emperor he's destined to become. We make our way to Wayne Priory, and we arrive at a scene of chaos in which the mythic Dawn kills Prior Maborel and attempts to kill Jauffre as well. They've taken the Amulet of Kings, a devastating blow to our efforts to once more light the dragonfires. And now we arrive at the next story beat. Whether it's Ben Kenobi, Gandalf, or Mr. Miyagi, every hero needs a mentor to help them along the way. This character usually has more experience in the new world the hero is entering, and they're meant to aid the hero in some way, whether that be through knowledge or experience or just reassurance. Jauffre seems like the obvious choice for a mentor. As someone who was close with his father and who observed what made Uriel a noble emperor, it would make sense for Jauffre to train the heir to live up to his duties. But does he actually act as the mentor? Structurally, I think we could point to this scene at Wayne Priory as the meet the mentor moment. But thematically, I believe the player is intended to be the mentor. It isn't Jauffre from whom Martin learns the lesson and the theme. It isn't Jauffre who helps Martin become the leader he was born to be. It isn't Jauffre who has experience fighting the Daedra and closing Oblivion gates. It's the player, and this is the main reason I believe the developers intentionally put us as the mentor. The mentor is often the second most important character in a story, and by making the player the mentor, Oblivion gives you the most influence over the story as possible outside of making you play as Martin himself. It puts you close to the action, close to the character around whom all things revolve. But the mentor isn't the one who changes. They already possess the qualities for which the hero is looking, which we'll get to later on. By making us the mentor, we get all the benefits of watching a character grow, allowing us to plug in with empathy, without forcing any kind of statement about who we are. Sure, we have to possess a quality the hero is missing, but we'll see later that all players possess this quality by the very nature of the game, and it's a quality that Jauffre lacks. Martin trusts us because we've already faced the great threat to Cyrodiil. We defeated the enemies outside of Kvatch and saved everyone trapped within. He's only willing to answer the call to adventure because of this. Jauffre, on the other hand, ignores Martin entirely. This meeting at the Priory was another perfect opportunity to make us care about him, but it's squandered yet again. The least they could do here is have Jauffre acknowledge Martin, but he literally just talks the whole time about Martin in the third person like he isn't right there.
We should get moving. I won't rest easy until Martin is safe at Cloud Ruler Temple.
Let's continue on to Cloud Ruler Temple.
Do you know how easy it would have been to fix this? It would have just taken one or two simple lines like this. It is almost worth the price of the amulet to see you alive and well, Martin. I don't think I could forgive myself if something were to happen to you. Boom. Now we care more, it's more realistic, Jauffre is less of a brick wall of exposition, and we have some foreshadowing for Martin's eventual demise. We could also have Martin thank Jauffre. Everyone likes a grateful main character. The hero of Kvatch tells me that you were the one who delivered me from the royal palace as a baby. He says you've watched over me ever since. You have my deepest gratitude. Then he could ask the question that somehow never comes up the rest of the story, a question anyone else would ask in his shoes. What was my father like? Not just Uriel Septim the Emperor, but Uriel Septim the man. They could have then continued this conversation for a little bit, breathing life into a dead scene, adding color to a bland old man, and deepening our care for the main protagonist. Even if this was one of the skippable conversations you can overhear, it would have added immense value to the narrative. But instead, we leave for Cloud Ruler Temple without a single word exchanged between the two most important non-playing characters. Equipped with a mentor and having answered the call, our hero must now cross the threshold into adventure. This involves an active choice on the hero's part. The moment in Oblivion comes when Martin gives a speech to the Blades. We arrive and the Blades give a very underwhelming cheer of welcome.
Hail, Dragonborn! Hail, Martin Septim! Hail!
Your Highness, the Blades are at your command.
I really like Martin's speech.
Jauffre, all of you. I know you all expect me to be Emperor. I'll do my best. But this is all new to me. I'm not used to giving speeches, but I wanted you to know that I appreciate your welcome here. I hope I prove myself worthy of your loyalty in the coming days. That's it. Thank you.
It fits well with what a simple priest would say. He's not an emperor, nor does he understand this destiny, but he wants to. He's making a commitment here. Sure, he's followed us thus far to hear us out, but now he's embracing his role as the heir to the Empire and trying to fill the shoes left by a father he never knew. These men, the Blades, have lost comrades and friends in service of his father and will readily do the same for him. It's no surprise when he says privately to you,
Not much of a speech, was it? But everyone expects me to suddenly know what to do, how to behave. They want an emperor to tell them what to do, and I haven't the faintest idea.
Martin is still just an ordinary man, unsure if this is truly his destiny, unsure if he wants it, unsure if there's really such a thing as destiny at all. This speech brings up a topic I want to touch on a little bit before we finish Act 1, and that is dialogue, particularly that of the Septims. While the dialogue between the father and the son are very different in tone and style, they serve the same purpose, which we'll talk about in a second. Uriel is eloquent and ominous and wise and noble. He's made to sound lofty by employing lesser used words we associate with formality and even religion, words like shall and behold.
Behold, in darkness a doom sweeps the land. You are a citizen of Tamriel, and you too shall serve her in your own way.
He also uses sentence structures that were more common in older English.
But in your face I behold the sun's companion. The dawn of Akatosh's bright glory may banish the coming darkness. With such hope, and with the promise of your aid, my heart must be satisfied.
It works together to create this Shakespearean Gandalf kind of dialogue, aided by the direct quotes from Julius Caesar. Martin too is articulate, but in a more relatable, everyman kind of way, as we heard from his speech just now. He rarely uses complicated sentence structures, but he is clearly well educated, which makes sense as an ex-mage and a current priest. He possesses a strong command of the language.
Emperor, amulet, and dragonfire. With these divine gifts, the Daedra of Oblivion have been kept at bay for thousands of years.
Though he claims not to be much for speeches, his words are often poignant and insightful. He does still sound formal, like a British schoolmaster, but not archaic like his father or many characters from The Lord of the Rings. It's obvious from the imagery and story that these two, the Septims, are supposed to represent benevolent nobility. The effort put into making their dialogue stand above every other NPCs in both eloquence and impact sets them apart, and it associates the game with beloved fantasy works like Tolkien and Shakespeare in doing so. We are meant to think of Aragorn and Boromir and Theoden, who, despite their flaws, are virtuous leaders who care for their people. Sure, Martin lacks the confidence at this point for a stirring speech such as Aragorn's at the Black Gate, but that's because he's still growing into the role. Martin's speech concludes Act 1. From a storytelling perspective, Act 1 should hook the audience, establish the world and key plot elements, introduce the main character and their inner struggles, and ask the big question. The big question when we finish Act 1 is, can we stop the Oblivion crisis? We've seen at Kvatch why it is important to do this. We've seen enough of the world in our journey to retrieve Martin, from the peaceful priory and grand capital city to the beautiful forest between cities, to know it's worth saving. The plot of thwarting Mehrunes Dagon is in motion, and so is Martin Septim's character arc. The theme of fate and destiny is front and center, ready to be explored. All this sounds so simple and even formulaic, but trust me, this is not always easy to get right. I've written enough bad novels to confidently say that getting all this done properly is easier said than done. Oblivion's setup is very clear, and the player has every reason to press on to Act 2. But we'll soon see that this second portion of the game is much less clean. Until this point, the storytelling has been tight and well structured. Martin is a compelling lead, with a simple and relatable desire to know his role in the world and to understand his destiny. There exists the greater threat of Mehrunes Dagon, but the smaller stakes of Martin's fate is where the story really finds its footing and builds momentum in the first act. Momentum that, unfortunately, quickly dissolves to nothing. When I was playing this game for the first time, I devoured the first 4 quests, which we've already talked about, and greatly enjoyed the last 5, which we'll get to soon enough. But it took me months to complete the middle few quests. I blamed Oblivion gates in my first video about the game. It made sense on the surface. They're repetitive and hostile and can feel obligatory. But those gates aren't really a factor until later in this middle section, by which point I'd already lost my will to play. Let's examine the real reason by returning to the hero's journey. Once they have a mentor, a hero will face challenges and meet the main factions of the universe as they draw closer to the big confrontation with their enemy. Vogler refers to this step as test, allies, and enemies. This takes place at the start of Act 2, and the next step after it is the approach to the innermost cave. It's building towards the 8th and most pivotal beat, the ordeal. In almost any story structure, like the hero's journey or Save the Cat, these 2 sections of the story are the least defined and offer storytellers the most freedom before the midpoint. There's only one true requirement, which somehow Oblivion manages to fumble, as we'll soon see. The first quest, after Martin is stowed away safely in Cloud Ruler Temple, is the Path of Dawn. This is the 5th quest, and the last one I cared about as a player for quite a while. We get to go back to the Imperial City and meet with Boris, the only surviving guard from the night the Emperor was assassinated, and help him eliminate the Mythic Dawn agent that's following him. Quite conveniently, the agent happens to be carrying a commentary on the Mysterium Xarxes. We'll talk more about the enemy's lack of intelligence later. For now, we meet with the other Mythic Dawn agents, kill them, and recover all 4 volumes of the commentaries. Then we are tasked with solving a puzzle that will lead us to the secret lair of the cult. Though let's be honest, if joining a secret cult was as simple as reading all the first brightly colored letters of each paragraph in the books, it would not be very secretive at all. You may note Martin's absence. Pivoting away from the main character works for this brief duration. It feels like when fantasy novels switch perspectives to a side character or a totally new character for a short chapter. Maybe they do this to show what the antagonists are up to, or give another point of view for an important event where the main character can't be present. After this, we return to Cloud Ruler Temple and receive a quest to infiltrate the Mythic Dawn. This is where everything breaks down, and we see how Oblivion fails to follow the only rule in this section of a story. What is that rule? The main characters have to be present. One chapter in a book, one scene in a movie, or one quest in a game away from the main character is acceptable, as we just mentioned. But for the next 6 quests, Martin does almost nothing whatsoever. Sure, he studies the Mysterium Xarxes from the safety of the temple and is the one giving you the quests some of the time, but he quickly changes from the nuanced lead character with complex desires who acts as the focal point of the story to the new info dumper with little to offer beyond explanations of magic.
I suspect that the secret of how to open a portal to Cameron's paradise lies within these pages.
So we are sent alone to infiltrate the Mythic Dawn at a shrine to Mehrunes Dagon. Here we watch Mankar Cameron disappear with the Amulet of Kings to his paradise to prepare for Mehrunes Dagon's return. Unable to retrieve the Amulet of Kings, we steal the Mysterium Xarxes and return to Cloud Ruler Temple. Martin is pretty shocked by this turn of events.
By the 9, such a thing is dangerous even to handle.
But in the end, he studies the book using his knowledge of the arcane. Before he was a priest, he was actually in the Mages Guild. This leads us to the single worst quest in the game.
The gate guards have reported seeing strangers on the road for the past several nights. I cannot leave Cloud Ruler undefended while my men search the whole mountainside, but these spies must be eliminated.
How do we know these are spies? Couldn't they just be travelers or bandits? It's not really addressed. This lays out a quest where we would expect some level of espionage, some level of sneaking around or discovering lies perhaps. Yet there is none of this. Here's what Bird tells us.
Except for Gerald coming back from a trip down south, things are pretty quiet. Not much travel right now with the Oblivion crisis.
We're then directed by the quest log to investigate Gerald's house. Returning from trips is mighty suspicious after all. We arrive and Gerald and her accomplice are there waiting. Before we can even ask them a single question, they seem to assume, for whatever reason, that their cover is blown and they immediately attack us with no explanation. My game also bugged out a little and Gerald seemed to think I was invisible.
Where are you?
After you kill these 2 spies, they drop a basement key. You go downstairs and conveniently there are the battle plans. How kind of the enemy. These top-tier spies didn't even bother destroying their orders in any way, but just left them there for us to discover. Better yet, the orders give far more detail than the spies reasonably need. Orders from someone with an ounce of competence would have said something like, scout out the defenses around Bruma and Cloud Ruler Temple. No need to state exactly why. Information wins wars, and so it must be guarded carefully. But for some reason, the handler of these spies spells out the exact plans for them. Scout out the city and Cloud Ruler Temple because we're going to open 3 little gates and then a big gate and attack so we can get Martin. Thank you for sharing, I guess. The alternative route you can take is to wait for the same spies near the ruins where they meet, but honestly that version is no better. Either way, it's the most brief and pointless quest of the main story and features perhaps the dumbest way possible for the bad guys to reveal their plans. This continues the trend of an enemy so incapable that it's hard to take them seriously. On top of this, Martin is fully absent from this quest as well. He will have learned enough about the Mysterium Xarxes while we were off on the last quest to send us off for the ingredients needed for a spell to follow Mankar into paradise. First, you need a Daedra artifact, then the armor of Tiber Septim, and then a Welkin Stone. After some dungeons, we'll retrieve these things for him before he informs us that the final piece of the puzzle is a Great Sigil Stone. Retrieving that Sigil Stone is where the story gets interesting again, so we'll pick that thread up later. This whole section has a glaring pace problem. It's painfully slow, it's boring without Martin, and it's way too long. Not just because they're dull quests with little to no plot whatsoever, but because there's also no urgency. The first quests are fast and fun, and I personally felt compelled to move from one to the next. It's because these quests have clear stakes. I'm not going to get to Kvatch and then just be like, nah, I'll handle this later. I mean, you definitely can, Oblivion is all about freedom, but it feels natural to keep going. The same is true of the last few quests, which we'll get to soon enough. They cascade into each other and encourage the player to follow the story continuously, unlike these middle quests, which feel almost unrelated. Sure, it's nice to have lulls in the main story where you feel free to go explore the world, especially a handcrafted Bethesda world, but these breaks can be added without jeopardizing the story or draining it of all urgency. Instead of making Act 2 feel unimportant, why not give the player a gap after Act 1 where they are told that the Blades need a few days to get a plan together and to get Martin up to speed. Then the player can, in good conscience, go explore and do some side quests if they want. Where if they desire to press on in the main quest, they can go steal Boris' bed and sleep until the Blades are ready. If you want to encourage the player to branch off from the main quest, give them an in-game reason to instead of just bogging down the story. I almost wonder if the main quest was initially shorter, and they decided to pad the middle with fetch quests to force a longer playtime. This turns you, the player, from the mentor guiding this troubled priest along his path of becoming an emperor, into a little golden retriever. Martin tells you there is a thing at a place, and you go to the place and get the thing. Dagon's Shrine is go to the not-so-secret shrine, pick up the Mysterium Xarxes, and return it to Martin. Spies is go to Bruma, locate the spy plans, and return to Jauffre. Blood of the Daedra is pick a Daedric quest, get the item, and return it to Martin. Blood of the Divines is just go to the tomb, get the armor, return it to Martin. Bruma Gate is a bit of an exception, but not particularly compelling given that there are dozens of gates to clear before and after this with very little to set it apart. Miskarkand is go to Miskarkand, get the Welkin Stone, and return it to Martin. Am I being too harsh, you ask? It's a fair question. In some ways, I am. Blood of the Divines is a relatively fun quest where you get to free some ghostly blades, lift a curse, and kill the undead warden who said it. The dialogue with the ghosts and the noble yet hollow way they interact with you is intriguing if underexplored.
No. That was the dream. I am awake now. I must fulfill my oath to the Emperor before I can finally rest.
Blood of the Daedra has some variety in that you get to pick which quest you do. You might have already done one, actually, allowing you to move right on. Bruma Gate isn't bad since you get to meet Bird, who's another generic but likable character. Dagon's Shrine lets the player choose between espionage or brute force and also provides the chance to save Julius, an Argonian who I swear wants to die, so there are some things that set these quests apart. Well, except for spies. That one I think is impossible to over-criticize. So apart from spies, they're not all that bad. They might be okay side quests, but unfortunately they do all share the same flaw. Martin is missing, and so is any real attempt at a story. Oblivion made a bold choice when they chose Martin as the main character, a choice that pays dividends when they lean into it. It's when they shy away from this decision that the story suffers. You don't get to make a choice that big and just act like it didn't happen for the middle third of the story. Imagine if Luke Skywalker didn't even bother going to the Death Star in A New Hope. Imagine if he just sent Chewie and Han and Ben Kenobi to do it all and chilled at Yavin because it was too dangerous. The movie would obviously fall apart without him. If you're going to invest this much time building up a character, you can't just yank them out of the conflict and say, well, we have to protect him. If he dies, the bad guys win. Logically, that might be true for Martin, but just write in a new reason why he has to be there. For Blood of the Divines, we could add a simple and believable magical rule that only Tiber Septim's descendants can retrieve the armor. For Blood of the Daedra, maybe Martin thinks it will take arcane knowledge to handle the artifact safely, and he's the most qualified, so he'll accompany you. For Bruma Gate, Martin could reasonably conclude that he needs to see a gate for himself to better understand how to face the threat. Spies needs to be completely rewritten, but it would be interesting if Martin had to use one of his old contacts from the Mages Guild to learn more about the enemy. Martin's presence in Miskarken could be explained similarly to the Blood of the Daedra by making the Welkenstone require special handling that only Martin can manage. Dagon Shrine is a bit more of a challenge, but that could play into the fun. Perhaps Martin could disguise himself, and part of the tension of the quest could be making sure his identity is kept secret. And he insists on coming because there's a chance we get the Amulet of Kings and go straight to the Dragonfires. That took me less than a minute to think of reasons for Martin to join all of the quests. I promise you, the writers could have come up with even more airtight explanations for Martin to be the one driving the action here. Then we would have cared, and the quests would stop being fetch quests. Martin's presence would instantly give the player an objective: protect the heir. His info dumps could be more spread out so they become info trickles, as they should be. We could expand on Martin's briefly mentioned backstory of when he was involved with dark magic.
Knowledge and power were our gods. You can guess the rest. We got in over our heads. People died. My friends died.
After all, this is the part of the story when the audience is supposed to get to know the characters better. Having Martin fighting alongside us would help him to grow into the man he needs to become. Players would like this active version of Martin more, someone who's willing to get their hands dirty. We could see him trying to be the kind of man he thinks his father was. It makes sense from every angle for Martin to be on these middle 6 quests, and without him, the whole story suffers, resulting in a painfully slow middle act, with very little of interest to string the player along to the latter part where things get interesting once more. You may be reasonably wondering if Martin really is the main character. After all, he hardly does anything for a third of the story. I would simply ask you to reserve judgment until the third act concludes. If the first third is not enough to convince you, I am confident the last third will be. Despite being mostly fetch quests, there are some moments of useful character growth for Martin during this section in which the theme of fate is continued. When you bring Martin the Mysterium of Xerxes, he says,
I put aside the dark arts when I became a priest, but the workings of fate may be seen in this too. The gods can turn anything to good, or so I piously told those who came to see me for advice.
You can hear the scorn in his voice when he says it. He believes this advice was simple-minded and uninformed, given by a version of himself unseasoned by the woes of death and destruction. His childlike faith began to crumble that night in Kvatch, and ever since, he's been wrestling to reconcile what he saw with what he once believed. But the workings of fate may be seen in this too. From these words, we gather that this isn't the first time he's seen divine intervention. He keeps noticing moments like this, where the stars seem to align, where events come together just so, allowing good a sliver of a chance to prevail. Not long after this, you get this line from him.
This was the essence of Manka Cameron's plot. He was undone only by the merest chance. But his complete victory remains perilously close.
Chance, he says. Yet he says it with hesitation. Was it chance that he was raised outside of the palace because of his status as a bastard, allowing him, an heir of the Empire, to survive the assassinations? Was it chance that he, a priest of Akatosh, knew to bring the fleeing victims of the Daedra to the temple where they would be protected? Was it chance that he was once in the Mages Guild, giving him the perfect life experience to discover the secrets within the Mysterium Xerxes? Chance indeed. We begin to see him warm to the idea of fate. These moments are the start of a rebirth of his faith in a divine plan, inching him closer to the beliefs of his father.
Perhaps I may yet come to believe it myself.
Now onto the part that gets interesting again, and onto one of the most important moments in every story, the ordeal. This is where we fight the bad guys, where the hero faces what they fear the most and confronts death. In our case, in order to retrieve a sigil stone, Martin plans to allow the enemy to go through with their plan and open an Oblivion gate right outside of Bruma. As you talk to him about this plan, the player's role as the mentor becomes more clear than ever before. When you suggest this plan isn't safe and he should remain behind, Martin says,
No. I'll lead the defense of Bruma myself. If I am to be emperor, it's time I started acting like one.
When you press and say you can lead the army, he responds with this.
What matters is that we act, that we do what's right when confronted with evil. That's what you did at Kvatch. It wasn't the gods that saved us, it was you. Were you acting for the gods? I don't know. But now, it's my turn to act.
What have we as the player always had that he hasn't? The courage and the clarity to act. As the player, we know we have ultimate freedom. That's what Bethesda games are all about. So of course, we have never been afraid to act. And Martin has seen how unburdened we are, how willing we are to put aside the question of free will altogether and take action. No player, regardless of their role-playing decisions, personal beliefs, or playstyle, will stop playing out of fear of making the wrong choice. This is part of the beauty of video games, and part of the genius of making us the mentor. All players possess this trait which Martin needs. And so we arrive at the moment where Martin is willing to stop asking, do the gods dictate every detail of the universe? And instead consider this question: what actions must I take to fulfill my duties as an individual in this universe? This particular line to the Countess suggests this.
I will do everything in my power to defend your city, my lady.
No mention of fate, just Martin promising action. He has still not answered for himself whether he believes in a divine plan or not, but for the moment, he's willing to ignore this concern for the greater good. No longer does he hide away in Cloud Ruler Temple. Instead, dressed for a fight, he leads his warriors to a battle against Hell itself. Listen to Martin's speech to his soldiers.
Soldiers of Cyrodiil, the Empire will stand or fall by what we do here today. We must kill whatever comes out of that gate. Soldiers of Cyrodiil, do you stand with me?
His obsession with fate is gone for the moment, replaced with the resolve of an emperor ready to die for his people. A battle ensues, and if we keep Martin alive for long enough, the Great Oblivion Gate opens, and we are sent like a one-man army to retrieve the Great Stone. There's a time mechanic to add urgency, making every wrong turn or prolonged fight feel like a threat to humanity itself. Once we retrieve the Sigil Stone, the gate collapses and the battle is won. But not without sacrifice. I've played this battle at least 4 times, and I've never completed it without losing either Bird, Jauffre, or Barus. I don't know if it's scripted, but this seemingly inevitable sacrifice adds some weight to the victory won. Unfortunately, right after this, we have one last departure from the hero's journey. Martin has shown that he is capable of being the leader he's meant to be, yet he sends the player alone into Paradise to face Mankar Cameron.
Farewell, my friend. Our fate is in your hands. Bring back the Amulet of Kings.
This quest is a missed opportunity. The discussions between Martin Septim and Mankar Cameron would have been a perfect way to examine the philosophy of the two opposing sides. After all, Mankar is accusing the gods of deceiving the world, of being false, and of betraying their true maker. This would have been the perfect chance for Martin to either deny the claim and support the gods he once trusted, and is slowly learning to trust once more, or be brought down once again to the position of nagging doubt. In reality, this speech is wasted because we have no dialogue options and mostly hear it as background noise.
So, the cat's paw of the Septims arrives at last.
If we had Martin along for the ride, he could respond out loud and engage us to think more critically about the argument. Honestly, I had to reread the transcript to even remember what Mankar's wild accusations even were, because the speech comes across as a TV show playing in the background of a diner, instead of a poetic monologue at the center of a stage, as it should be.
I am the midwife of the mythic dawn, Tamriel reborn. I welcome you, if you truly are the agent of fear.
Let's get this over with!
The words come and go as we make our way through the worst of the underground section of Paradise. We're aided by Eldemil, a turncoat member of the Mythic Dawn, and soon find ourselves face to face with Mankar Cameron himself. This is where I began to question Mankar's big plan. All he has to do is make absolutely certain Martin doesn't get a hold of the Amulet of Kings, under any circumstances. If Martin never gets the amulet, the dragon fires are never lit, and eventually the barrier will be weak enough for Mehrunes Dagon to return. This actually explains why he would leave his followers behind and go to Paradise or Gaiar Alata. There is no way we can get to him there. As long as he doesn't leave behind the Mysterium Xarxes open in plain sight for us to bring back to Martin and use to reach Paradise. But to be fair, he probably needed it to open the portal, and his daughter does die in an attempt to keep us from stealing it. But it actually appears that Mankar had this planned all along somehow. Here's what he says when we arrive at Paradise.
You didn't think you could take me unawares, here of all places, in the paradise that I created.
Mankar sees you as the final vestige of a soon-to-be-forgotten era of Tamriel and welcomes your challenge. He considers you a confirmation of his destiny.
I welcome you. You truly are the agent. I tire of the self-styled heroes who set themselves in my path only to prove unworthy.
His final speech is well written, and it paints him as a man who is so confident in his destiny that any challenge is but a badge of honor. He reminds me of Julius Caesar in that way, who also believed fate made him invincible.
I have waited a long time for you, champion of old Tamriel. You were the last gasp of a dying age. My long duel with the Septims is over, and I have the mastery. The Emperor is dead. The Amulet of Kings is mine, and the last defender of the last ragged Septim stands before me, in the heart of my power. Let us see who at last has proved the stronger.
We're in Mankar Cameron's world, and he's toying with us. This build-up led me to believe the fight would be impossible to win. Yet somehow I killed him in less than a minute.
You're a traitor to your own record!
Really? He supposedly left breadcrumbs for us to follow him, so he can unleash his vengeance against us and end all possible resistance. But then he crumbles when the fight comes. It's not only unrealistic, but extremely anticlimactic. If he is this weak in the seat of his power, he should have never left behind even the most remote of possibilities for us to catch him. It seems that Mankar is only as smart as the questionable plot will allow him to be. But maybe this wasn't always the case. There's a theory that Bruma Cameron, daughter of Mankar Cameron and the woman you killed during the Dagon Shrine quest, and then again at Paradise, was going to betray her father. There are some leftover pieces of dialogue for an alternate version of the Spies quest I spent a while complaining about earlier. In this dialogue, you ask to see Bruma Cameron on 2 separate occasions, one of which is next to another option to speak to Martin instead. This would imply that they are in the same place, possibly even working together. There's also an empty conversation between Bruma and her father in Paradise that some believe implies a confrontation. Maybe she reveals herself triumphantly as a spy, or perhaps he catches her at the last moment, but not in time to stop the help she gives you, the player. This theory and the 2 small pieces of evidence that support it are tenuous at best, but I think something like this could have greatly benefited the story. Between the painfully obviously colored letters in the commentaries, Mankar leaving behind a nice little path for us to follow him to Paradise, the perfectly spelled out battle plans, and his inability to defend himself in a reality he created, Mankar is positively incompetent as far as villains go. The first of these can be explained by gameplay limitations. If the riddle was too complicated, players wouldn't have been able to solve it. But the second 3 feel like genuine oversights in the current context. However, if a high-ranking Mythic Dawn agent were to be working with us from the inside, those pieces would suddenly fall into place. The Spies quest could revolve around making contact with the double agent, and getting the information we need about the Bruma Gates in a far more plausible way. It would explain why Mankar is so easily defeated in Paradise. His confidence isn't taking into account a betrayal from his own daughter. That could entail a direct confrontation of some kind, or a weapon or spell that gives us an edge. It would also give the writers a chance to show what kind of experiences would cause Mankar's daughter to turn away from him. What parts of his ideologies she found objectionable. Maybe she wanted to remake the world and cleanse it as her father described, but once she saw the alternative with which it would be replaced, the atrocities of the Deadlands, she realized it would be far worse than any injustices she experienced in the Empire. Or maybe she found something in this reality worth saving. A lover, a friend, or even just a still moment by a quiet stream. We get a tiny bit of this kind of thinking with Eldamil, who chooses to help us reach Mankar.
They seem to think this decadent, mundane world of theirs was worth defending.
But it would have been far more impactful had that seed been planted in the Spies quest or even earlier. Instead, Eldamil feels like a last-minute addition that barely impacts the battle against Cameron. The main point I'm making is that the bad guys in their current state are inept and all too easy to thwart. I wish the writers had fleshed out the parts of the main quest that dealt with tracking down Mankar and defeating him. Turning Bruma into an insider could have made this both more realistic and more interesting. Unfortunately, Oblivion pulls up short. Paradise is still an interesting quest, but it could have been profound instead. On top of that, with Martin's absence, it doesn't fit particularly well into the hero's journey. Speaking of which, the next step of the hero's journey is called the reward. The reward beat is as simple as it sounds. The hero is rewarded for their efforts in the previous beat, the ordeal. For Martin, this occurs when we return and give him the Amulet of Kings. Listen carefully to what he says when we give it to him.
Yes, of course. What am I waiting for? After all, this is my destiny. And no man can deny his destiny.
This echoes Uriel Septim's words closely.
So do we all. But what path can be avoided whose end is fixed by the almighty gods?
It seems Martin has finally come to fully believe in his destiny once more, and by proxy he has come to grips with the will of the gods. But what caused this change of heart? Well, this is just one step in a clearly articulated progression. First, when we find him at Kvatch, Martin is full of doubt and anger at the gods. Then, after the people who are with him are saved and he learns of how he might aid in stopping the Oblivion crisis, he has a time where his frozen heart begins to thaw as he works things out in the solitude of Cloud Ruler Temple. This softening of his heart is best seen in the moment when he realizes how perfectly he is positioned, as both the heir and someone who has studied the darker persuasions of magic, to study and then decode the Mysterium Xerxes. Still, he is not convinced, but there comes a willingness to act and set aside the question of divine intervention altogether when the Empire needs him, a skill that he learned from us, the player. Then, when, against all odds, his efforts to retrieve the Amulet of Kings are rewarded, he sees this as a confirmation that there was indeed a plan to preserve the people of Cyrodiil through him and through the divine blood coursing through his veins. Martin's character arc is nearly complete, and he's finally grown from that trembling, doubting priest to an emperor-in-waiting confident in his destiny.
Let's go to the Imperial City at once, before the enemy can recover from Manca Cameron's death.
This scene concludes Act 2, which I believe is by far the weakest of the 3 acts. A good second act should explore the cast and plot and show the main character in pursuit of their goal. In Oblivion, each quest does technically get us tangibly closer to recovering the Amulet of Kings, which we need to declare Martin Emperor so we can relight the Dragonfires. If nothing else, this makes the second act easy to follow. It falls short less because of a lack of clarity and more because there's so little substance. Martin is too passive, making the story a slow-paced slog. The moments of growth and storytelling are few and far between. Most of the good done here takes place in the sparse conversations with Martin between quests, or at last in the battle for Bruma. Luckily, Act 3 is considerably better. The name of the next step in Joseph Campbell's version of the hero's journey, The Road Back, is a bit confusing, which is why Christopher Vogler calls it The Chase instead. All you really need to know is that this is the build-up toward the final confrontation, and it often mirrors or reverses the crossing the threshold beat. We, Martin, and whoever is left of the Blades must make our way back to the capital. There's a sense of racing against time here. This is our last step before we can light the Dragonfires and end the threat to Cyrodiil, but we're not really sure what the bad guys might try in the meantime. Before we head out, Martin will say this.
The barriers between our world and Oblivion weaken with every gate that is opened. If Mehrunes Dagon is able to cross over into our world, even relighting the Dragonfires will not be able to send him back.
I like the foreshadowing here. Not only does it make us want to go to the capital immediately, but it also tells us exactly what's about to happen. Back in the Crossing the Threshold beat, Martin followed us to Cloud Ruler Temple and gave an earnest but slightly naive speech. It's fitting that in the Chase beat, we're now leaving the temple with the soon-to-be Emperor. It's a very different Martin who travels to the capital. No longer is he following helplessly as he did then, but rather he is initiating the action. I mean, technically he's following you, but that's because of the game mechanics. He's no longer in the simple priest's garb. He's dressed in the royal robe of his father, adorned with the Amulet of Kings we've spent so much time retrieving. We make it to the capital and enter the council chambers. Then, as Martin is declared Emperor, Mehrunes Dagon attacks, leading us to our climax. The climax of the story, or the resurrection beat, often revolves around a single choice the hero must make, and it requires them calling upon all that they have learned during their long journey of growth. It is the final test, and without the lessons they have learned, they cannot hope to prevail. We fight our way urgently to the Temple of the One, hoping to light the Dragonfires and end the conflict before all is lost. The attack on the capital quickly turns into a frenzy, and in the chaos of a losing battle, Mehrunes Dagon returns as a giant, demon-like avatar that fills the sky.
Lighting the Dragonfires will no longer save us. The barriers that protected us from Oblivion are gone.
But of course, the story can't end there.
I have an idea, one last hope. I must reach the Dragonfires and the Temple of the One.
And here is the choice around which the beat is centered. Here is the final step of Martin's transformation. Complete surrender to the gods.
You'll just have to trust me. I know now what I was born to do.
Born to do. That is the essence of fate, is it not? That you are born with a purpose, that all who are born are given purpose. Martin, after seeing the slim chance of triumph never quite get snuffed out, after watching long shot after long shot strike the target with perfect accuracy, believes it's the gods who have guided each arrow. Kvatch, whom he served, doubted, and then came to trust once more, set him aside for this great moment. He has not always seen a redemptive plan in this brutal world, violent and unforgiving, but now he does. He has one final line to our character.
I do what I must do. I cannot stay to rebuild Tamriel. That task falls to others. Farewell. You've been a good friend in the short time that I've known you. But now I must go. The dragon waits.
Then he battles Mehrunes Dagon by becoming the avatar of Akatosh. The gods quite literally act through him, and the distinguishing line between Martin and the divine is eroded, bringing his surrender and his journey of total trust in his divine purpose to an end. The final beat of a hero's journey is the return with the elixir. One thing that makes a hero, according to Joseph Campbell, is a willingness to serve for the greater good. And this step often involves sacrifice of some kind. Well, there is hardly a greater good than saving the world, and hardly a greater sacrifice than giving your life to do so. If there was any doubt that Martin was the main character prior to the conclusion, the fact that he faces Mehrunes Dagon and not you, the fact that all you do is escort him to where he makes his final choice, should be enough to tell you that he was always the main character. And I think it's done fairly well for the most part. Martin gives us a person to care about, a character arc to carry the story, an inner conflict to hold a light to its deepest themes, and a template to keep the pacing in line. With some trimming of the fat in the middle and his presence in the Paradise quests, this main story could have been even more compelling. Still, I think it deserves recognition for its execution from beginning to end. The tutorial ended with Uriel Septim's final request to the player.
Give it to Jauffre. He alone knows where to find my last son. Find him and close shut the jaws of Oblivion.
And now the main story ends with his son doing exactly that. Father and son, both moving to the strings of the great puppeteer Fate, embrace their roles as sacrificial lambs to end the Oblivion crisis and usher in the next era of Tamriel. This continues the Christ archetype in several ways, some more obvious than others. Martin is a man, but also part divine, and he willingly gives his life to save his people. Much like Christians claim Christ was both man and God and allowed himself to be slain to save his people. They also both usher in a new contract of sorts between the divine and the mortal.
The amulet is shattered. Dagon is defeated. With the dragon's blood and the amulet of kings, we have sealed the gates of Oblivion forever.
The Amulet of Kings is no longer needed to keep Oblivion at bay. Speaking of which, the original agreement between Akatosh and the people was dependent upon their actions, as stated here in the in-game book, The Amulet of Kings. So long as the Empire shall maintain its worship of Akatosh and his kin, and so long as Alicia's heirs shall bear the Amulet of Kings, Akatosh and his divine kin maintain a strong barrier between Tamriel and Oblivion, so that the mortal man need never again fear the devastating summoned hosts of the Daedra Lords. After Martin's sacrifice, however, there's no longer any responsibility on the people. The gods will do the heavy lifting. This echoes what Christians believe about Jesus, about how he fulfilled the Old Testament covenant and removed the need for continual sacrifices. The similarities continue. Martin's divine blood qualified him to make the sacrifice in the first place. No one else could wear the amulet, just as Christians say Jesus' claim to divinity did the same. Then, after his sacrifice, Martin ascends to be with his father and his father's fathers, presumably all the way back to Tiber Septim, the ninth divine, just as Jesus' disciples claim he ascended to the right hand of God the Father. In a way, this scene is Martin's resurrection too. How could he possibly be narrating these things if he were truly dead? I wish I was observant enough to have found all these myself, but several of the more subtle parallels are from a blog by Liz Mentica. If you're interested in any more details, I've linked the article in the description. The point is that the parallels are unmistakable. The Christ archetype is immediately recognizable to Western audiences at the very least. It's effective in making Martin's story memorable and impactful by tapping into those cultural roots. And there are too many of these parallels to believe it was anything but intentional.
The shape of the future, the fate of the Empire. These things now belong to you.
I believe it is also intentional that Martin leaves us on a statement about fate. When I first began to notice the theme of fate, I assumed it would end with a thesis somewhat more contemporary in nature. I assumed it would talk about how fate is an illusion, and that we must take hold of the metaphorical ship's wheel of our lives and steer the rudder of happenstance in the direction we want, that no man is bound by destiny, and that all have the ability to change their stars. This is a common theme in storytelling, like in A Knight's Tale, which is all about overcoming the place in society into which you are born and subverting the world's demands of what you can and can't be. It's a comforting message, as most people want to feel in control of their lives. So I was somewhat surprised when Uriel blatantly stated that all men are bound to destiny, and that none can deny what is set in motion by the gods. I chalked this up to being a way to contrast Martin's journey, assuming that he would break the chains of fate and show that our destiny is what we make it. So when he said,
"But I've come to realize that it doesn't matter. What matters is that we act,"
I felt somewhat more comfortable. This was going in a direction I expected. We've seen him angry at the gods, unable to see the good in his horrible circumstances, and now he's breaking free of the burden of fate. But as we saw, this was simply another step in his journey before he too arrived at the same conclusion as his father. And it's not just the Septims. Everyone in this game speaks of destiny as an undeniable force. Even the main human villain, Mankar Cameron, believes this. He implies fate comes from Mehrunes Dagon himself.
What are scholarship, love, and mercy when compared to fate, night, and destruction?
And as we talked about before, he's ready for your challenge in paradise because he's so confident in his destiny.
In your coming, I hear the footsteps of fate.
Baffled, I had to admit that it seemed the game believed everyone in Tamriel was bound by fate. Well, all except one person. Me.
That's what you did at Kvatch. It wasn't the gods that saved us, it was you.
There's fairly direct support of my theory that comes after you return from Miskarken with the Welkenstone. Martin is thankful for your help, and when you ask if you even really had a choice, he says,
"Yes, you did. I can't force you to do anything. I understand that."
Martin seems utterly convinced that you, his mentor and the player, do have free will. Everyone in Cyrodiil is like this. When they talk of their fate or fate in general, it's immutable, all-powerful. But when they talk about you in relation to fate, this suddenly changes. Listen to the Countess's words right before the Battle of Bruma.
Bruma's fate is in the hands of the gods now. And yours.
Fate is in the gods' hands now, and ours. Not Martin's, the soon-to-be emperor leading the battle, but ours. Further, Martin's last words run counter to the lesson he learned, which was that fate is inevitable, and that he was born and preserved by the gods for a specific heroic act. He throws out all mention of destiny, all trappings of fate, and says that the future is for you to shape.
When the next Elder Scroll is written, you shall be its scribe.
The most powerful people in the game, Uriel Septim, who rules much of Tamriel, Mankar Cameron, who nearly ends the world, and Martin Septim, who saves it, are all convinced that fate is beyond their control. Yet all of them seem to believe you are above it.
This burden is now yours alone. You hold our future in your hands.
Even the gods seem to believe this about us. For example, if you do the recommended quest for Blood of the Daedra and talk to Azura, she will tell you this.
5 followers slew the vampire Dratic and its kin, but all were infected by the foul creature. Knowing their fate, they sealed themselves up in the vampire's lair. Their suffering weighs heavily on me.
Note the word fate and how it seems beyond her control. So while gods and kings and usurpers are bound by fate, we the player are not. Every good story is centered around a theme the writers find meaningful, and Oblivion is no exception. Seeing noble heroes struggle with the burden of duty and journeying alongside them as they contemplate the possibility that they were born for but a single purpose adds a layer of depth to the game I personally find compelling. It leads us to conclude that as the player, we are beyond this web of destiny's weaving, that freedom isn't just a gameplay mechanic. It's a foundational piece of the storytelling. An effective third act depicts a final confrontation between the main character and the villain. It ties up character arcs and loose ends, and provides a sense of satisfaction at seeing everything that was set up in the previous acts come to a tidy close. Martin's story arc, the themes of fate, and the Oblivion crisis all come to an end with Martin's final choice. That sense of catharsis sinks in as he narrates his final words.
But now I must go. The dragon waits.
We know he is happy with his decision. The enemy has been defeated, and all is well. We can sit back and smile at the conclusion of a story well told. It may be imperfect, but Oblivion's main quest is memorable, and it earns its place as one of the few games with an open world where you make your own character and have no limitations, but also have a strong and relatable main character. Every aspect of the storytelling exists in service to this. Limitations are what make characters interesting, so those limitations are given to another character. Fate and inevitability can feel like shackles, so the chains bind Martin instead of the player. And we, the one who begins as a prisoner, are the only character without those fetters. Now that Tamriel is saved, it is time to enjoy that freedom. The main quest may be concluded, but Oblivion is only just beginning. The rest of the story, as Martin says as he ascends, is up to you. Will you be a thief fighting for the poor? An assassin with the power of life and death in your hands? A fighter loyal to their comrades? A champion of a barbaric sport of slaughter? A mage determined to save their guild? A divine warrior on a mission from heaven? The ruler of a land of madness? Or perhaps all of the above? With the story of a great man behind you and limitless freedom before you, it is time to embark upon a journey that you will likely remember for the rest of your life.
All hail the champion of Cyrodiil!
Hello there! This video ended up being a little bit longer than I originally intended, which is why it took me 9 months to make it, but hopefully you enjoyed the in-depth analysis of the Oblivion main storyline. If so, feel free to leave a like, and also I'd love to hear what you think about the story in general, or my analysis, or even the Oblivion remaster. If you're interested in more analysis, if this video does well, I'd love to do more on Skyrim or some of the guilds in Oblivion, so if that's something you're interested in, feel free to subscribe. I do have a Patreon, just one tier, called Early Supporter. Speaking of which, thank you to my current supporters, Cole Troutman, Michelle Matazuski, Thomas Ritz, Finn, and John Corrigan. Oh, and Euphoria. If you're interested in watching a video about the world building of Skyrim, feel free to click here. And if you're interested in watching whatever YouTube thinks that you might like, click here. Anyhow, I know that wasn't a short video, so I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to watch me talk about a game I really enjoy. Alright, I'll see you in the next video.